What was your character thinking when they charged at that dragon with just a penknife? We'll never know, because you didn't write down any of their thoughts. One of the main advantages of a novel, and I suppose other forms of written work, is that we have inherent access to the thoughts of the characters. In a visual medium, you have to rely on the actor's ability to convey emotions through their face in a close-up or body language, or resort to those weird narrative interludes where you can hear the character's thoughts. It's much easier to write character thoughts in a written medium. It's way harder to describe explosions, though. So I thought we should talk about some of the things that go into writing character thoughts. This ended up being a much more deeper topic than I thought it would be, so I'll probably do multiple videos on the subject. Today is just kind of a bit of an introduction. And I know what you're thinking. Oh golly, I'm not subscribed to Carl's channel yet. Gee whiz, I better do that right now. I know for a fact that golly and gee whiz are words that you say to yourself in your head all the time. The first decision you need to make when it comes to character thoughts is how you're going to represent them in the writing, and there are a few different options here. The three main options are direct speech, indirect speech, and free indirect speech. Allow me to begin by directing your attention to direct speech. As the name directly implies, direct speech involves the direct conveyance of a character's thought to the reader, directly. Direct thoughts are formatted in a similar way to dialogue, often italicized and with a dialogue tag, although I've often seen them without the quotes you would see around dialogue, and also just italicized and without dialogue tags. So there's a few different ways you can format it, and I don't want to piss off the copy editors and receive incredibly well-formatted hate mail. He peered out over the half-finished skyscraper. Can that beam hold my weight? Horatio asked. That's an example of direct speech, a direct character thought, a direct quotation from the character, which includes a tag, although just like with dialogue, you can sometimes drop the tag. Direct speech is nice because it removes any abstraction, since it's a straight quotation from the character. Even the tense of what's said in direct speech is preserved, so any direct thoughts written in your novel will be in present tense, even if the rest of your prose is in past tense. Next up is indirect speech. Here we're mixing the narrator and the character a little bit. The thoughts themselves become somewhat more abstracted. Horatio peered out over the half-finished skyscraper. He wondered if that beam could support his weight. Here we're moving the text to third person, and we're losing the direct quotation. We're not formatting the thought as dialogue. The narrator is quoting the intention of the character's thoughts, but not the direct words. Lastly, there's free indirect speech, which represents a sort of complete blending of the narrator and the character. Horatio peered out over the half-finished skyscraper. Could that beam support his weight? You'll notice with free indirect speech that the thought has become a question again, whereas in indirect speech it changed to a statement. In direct speech and indirect speech, the narrator is simply stating the thought the character has. In free indirect speech, it's as if the narrator is thinking alongside the character, like their wonderment has sort of merged together and they're thinking the same thought as the character. If you have a really strongly voiced narrator, you may actually have the narrator injecting their own thoughts into the scene. Like in the example above, Horatio might not be the kind of person who wonders about the load-bearing capacity of a beam. He might be the kind of guy who just walks onto beams with wanton disregard for their structural integrity. It might be the narrator themselves who's commenting on whether the beam is sturdy. This sort of comment is a useful bit of characterization because it implies that Horatio is not asking the questions that he should be asking for his own self-preservation. Free indirect speech with a strongly voiced narrator may not work, and these types of situations lend themselves better to indirect or straight up direct speech, since it's harder to distinguish what is a narrator's thought and what is a character's thought when you're using free indirect speech. If you are having a hard time with character voice, then direct thoughts may be helpful. This is again a place where the strongly voiced narrator can cause problems because they suck a lot of the air out of the room that could be used to project character voice. Because everybody knows that literary voice is powered by air, obviously. Now I know all the first-person perspective writers are thinking, I don't know what to do. My narrator is the character having these thoughts. First person perspective is interesting when it comes to character thoughts. Technically, everything the narrator says is sort of a character thought in first person, so by default you may lean on indirect speech or free indirect speech. What you need to decide on is whether your story is more cinematic, with the narrator and the character being basically the same person, or if the narrator version of the character is separate from the story version of the character and their narration is colored by their experience. If the narrator is 50 years old and they're recounting events that happened to their 20-year-old self, then they can use direct quotations or indirect speech because their 20-year-old self is going to have a different perspective on events than their 50-year-old self. The 20-year-old version of them probably reacts and thinks differently than their 50-year-old self, even though they are the same character. This works especially well if you're using the narrator version of the character to sort of foil off the character in the story, as you can highlight the different ways of thinking, which will create some interesting contrast and help with characterization. If you have a full-on omniscient first-person narrator, they will likely be coloring the narrative with a lot of their own thoughts and opinions, and these will be distinct from the character's thoughts at the time of the story. One thing to consider when it comes to character thoughts is narrative distance. Regardless of which method you use to write character thoughts, the fact that you're writing character thoughts at all indicates that you're using a relatively close narrative distance. If we know what the character is thinking on some level and it's being related to the reader, we know that we're using quite a close narrative distance. Of the three, though, I would say free indirect speech is the closest narrative distance-wise, since it represents a sort of merging of the narrator with the character. With free indirect speech, the character's thoughts are directly influencing the narrator's voice, which contrasts, for example, direct speech, where the narrator is simply relating information. With direct speech, we can read the character's mind, but that information simply gets relayed back to the reader by the narrator. Free indirect speech actually affects the narrative itself, which gets us much closer. Now, if you don't enjoy writing character thoughts, I'll add here that you don't need to. Remember, you can create a lot of intrigue and mystery around a character by not revealing what they think. In fact, I would go as far as to say you should really consider whether your character thoughts actually benefit the story. I think a lot of people feel that adding character thoughts will make their characters feel more fleshed out or that they help with characterization, but I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Character thoughts, when poorly written, can be a bit of a crutch to get past actions or behaviors that don't strongly imply what the character is thinking and feeling. I can tell you that for me personally in my writing, I very rarely write character thoughts. Now, part of that is just because I love a very mysterious protagonist who doesn't like to reveal things about themselves, but I also think in a way, it's easier to show elements of the character through their actions and behaviors than it is to imply these things through their thoughts. That's not to say that character thoughts are bad, far from it, but just like anything else in writing, they need to be done well. The first step in doing that is to understand the different methods that you can use to convey character thoughts, which is what we've been talking about in this video. I had intended this to just be one part of the video, but it ended up being a much deeper topic than I thought, so I will probably have to cover all the other aspects of writing character thoughts in another video because this one is running really long already. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you think you would like to see more stuff like this, I think you should subscribe to my channel and check out all of my other writing advice related videos. I think that you'll enjoy them, and I hope that you think you will too. So there you have it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.